Surrealism was conceived by André Breton as a revolutionary movement, embracing art, society and politics. He was reacting against what he saw as established patterns in Western culture that he felt had to be broken down and replaced. He took the view that these established patterns in human thought had given rise to the horrors of war and conflict that he had witnessed, and he felt that this could only be removed from human culture by a new creative process which sidestepped the analytical human mind and was fed directly from the unconscious part of human nature that Sigmund Freud had uncovered through his psychoanalysis. Thus, Breton urged artists to seek unconscious sources, such as automatic drawing, random controlled methods of generating artwork. We recall his statement from the first Surrealist manifesto. Surrealism is pure psychic automatism, by which it's intended to express, either verbally or in writing, the true function of thought. Thought dictated in the absence of all control exerted by reason, and outside all aesthetic or moral preoccupations. We have seen how Surrealism emerged out of the earlier movement Dada. Much of what we might today label as Surrealist actually arose from Dadaist collage. Thus the early paintings by Max Ernst, as with his Dada Goga and Pleiades of 1920, Birds, Fish, Snake and Scarecrow, and the Elephant Celebes of 1921, predate the formation of the Surrealist movement by 4 or so years. In these paintings, Ernst would appear to be applying Dadaist collage to painting. Rather than cutting up images from a magazine and pasting them to make a collage, he did it in his mind, painting directly onto the canvas. This appears to be one of the sources for Verist or figurative surrealism. Another form of surrealist painting emerged in the late 1920s. This is biomorphic surrealism, especially seen in the work of Yves Tanguy. This was non-figurative and abstract, but based on organic rounded forms, often smoothly painted. This would appear to have emerged from the work of Joan Miró. We could certainly see this suddenly appearing in Miró's paintings in 1924. Up to this time, Miró was under the influence of Picasso, as in his 1923 painting, The Farmer's Wife. But in 1924, he found a new style in works such as Maternity. Here he moved away from cubist linearity, the deconstruction of the image, and the presentation of multiple conflicting viewpoints, to a less rigid geometry and the depiction of rounded shapes. In Harlequin's Carnival of the same year, he fills the whole picture space with these organic rounded forms. Another influence on biomorphism was Hans Arp. As early as 1914, he was working with rounded organic forms, as in his relief clock. He was a key artist in the Dadaist movement and was part of the early Surrealist group. But being unhappy with the emergence of figurative surrealism, he broke away in 1931 to form the Abstraction Création movement, and he then began working his organic abstract forms in sculptures. Other possible influences on biomorphic surrealism can be seen in some of the paintings of Paul Klee and Vasily Kandinsky. By the 1930s, Surrealism had momentum that favoured the figurative or Verist style. This is due to the power of the works of Dali, Magritte, Brauner, Dominguez and others. Biomorphic aspects sometimes appear in Dali and others, but the continuation of the style through the 1930s lay primarily in the hands of Yves Tanguy. Tanguay's biomorphic abstract surrealism, although certainly not figurative, retained a connection to the outer world through his use of perspective and his suggestion of almost human figures through the ways in which he assembled his pebble-like forms. Thus it did not push on into total non-objective abstraction. An abstract surrealism has emerged in more recent decades, and we'll look at this in a later lesson in this course. We see here Tanguay's 1937 Day of Inertia, with its clear image of a man and a child walking a dog. British artist and naturalist Desmond Morris continued working with biomorphic forms up until the end of the century, with such paintings as The Arena and The Sentinel, both of 1976. We have looked at his work in the lesson on British Surrealists. André Masson was an early member of the Surrealist group. He dived wholeheartedly into Breton's idea of creating art without the use of the analytical mind, creating a series of automatic drawings. However, he was later excluded from the group by Breton after the publication of the second Surrealist Manifesto, which cleansed away those who would not accept Breton's extreme political agenda. In 1938, Masson had a sudden new insight and produced an astonishing series of paintings which had clear biomorphic components. Thus, his Moon of that year, and the Metamorphosis of the Lovers, in which the two lovers' bodies are transformed into plant-like organic forms. And similarly with Pygmalion, also of 1938. These paintings, of course, are strongly figurative, but Masson is now clearly creating a pictorial language using biomorphic forms. By 1942, when he had escaped the war in Europe to the USA, he created Meditation on an Oak Leaf, where the figurative elements had all but disappeared. The Chilean Roberto Matta, foreseeing the war in Europe, emigrated from France to the USA in 1938. But while in Paris, he had met most of the Surrealists and had begun drawing. Once in America, he took up oil painting. His works from the early 1940s are an abstract surrealism, which has elements of biomorphism. An example being his 1941 painting, Invasion of the Night. His Revolt of the Opposites of 1943 depicts some biomorphic forms within a strange space. Despite the degree of abstraction, he is able to create perspective and a sense of depth. This is in no sense a flat, abstract painting. In the mid-1940s, Matta seems to have pushed his art style to the limit of abstraction that he wished to go, with paintings such as The Hanged Man. And then he began reintroducing figurative elements. In 1945, he produced a set of 4 tarot designs for André Breton's journal Arcane 17. These had stylized biomorphic forms of the human body, especially the face, which he used in many of his later paintings. As with many others, Matta was expelled from the Surrealists in 1947 after a fight with Breton. Matta seems to have stepped up to the brink of full abstraction, gazed over the abyss at the implication for himself as an artist, and drew back into a degree of figuration. From the mid-40s, he created paintings set in an abstract space, often with stylized, biomorphic human forms. His early 1940s paintings, however, had a profound influence on some of the American artists, especially perhaps on Arshile Gorky, an Armenian who had come to America in 1920. Gorky had wished to establish himself as an artist, and initially copied various styles, such as that of Cézanne and Picasso. In the early 1940s, he developed a totally free abstract style. One of his first in this new style was 1 Year the Milkweed of 1944, where he allowed the thin paint to run down the canvas without his intervention. The Liver is the Coxcomb, also from 1944, so impressed Breton that he declared the painting to be one of the most important paintings made in America. He also stated that Gorky was a Surrealist, Breton's highest compliment. Gorky's paintings opened the way to the pure abstraction of the abstract expressionists. This dispensed with figuration and technique, and relied on spontaneous, automatic or subconscious creation. Breton was eager to embrace this as a return to his original conception of Surrealism. This rapidly gave rise to the action painting of Jackson Pollock, dripping and throwing paint onto a canvas. It also gave rise to the colour field painters, such as Mark Rothko, who painted canvases with a flat field of the same colour, often with no separate components. The American art world had felt rather challenged by the arrival of European Surrealists such as Dali, Dominguez, Seligman, Duchamp, with a deep understanding of European culture and cultural references outside of art itself. Dali had even ingratiated himself within American popular culture through his association with Disney. So parts of the American art establishment felt the need to encourage the development of a truly American art. Critics such as Clement Greenberg promoted the emerging style of abstract expressionism, and within only a few years it was established as the new paradigm. It seems that even American government agencies, including the CIA, subsidized expensive international exhibitions of American expressionism and bought paintings to encourage the development of this style, as a means of cultural imperialism, making America the powerhouse of new art. And sure enough, within a few years, New York was established as a centre for modern art, replacing Paris. The fact that it was easy for abstract expressionists to sell and exhibit their paintings affected the work itself, and rapidly most of these artists abandoned selling small canvases to private collectors in favour of producing large format, museum-scale pieces. Few artists could withstand the pressure from galleries and the American art establishment, and had to start turning out abstract works. This emerging style was also philosophically underpinned by the then emerging postmodern perspective on art and culture. Thus, abstract surrealism had become transformed into American abstract expressionism. These artworks became so abstract that there was no objective content. The artists did not consider their work to have any content. Indeed, the true nature of the work lay only in its act of creation, usually one of some random, wild, expressive process. These artists were not concerned to create a narrative or depict in their paintings any meaning. Instead, the essence of the work lay only in its creation. As Harold Rosenberg, the critic and promoter of abstract expressionism, wrote, "What was to go on the canvas was not a picture, but an event. The gesture on the canvas was a gesture of liberation from value, political, aesthetic, moral." As Pollock himself wrote, "When I'm in my painting, I'm not aware of what I'm doing. It's only after a sort of get-acquainted period that I see what I've been about. I've no fear of making changes, destroying the image, etc., because the painting has a life of its own. I try to let it come through. It's only when I lose contact with the painting that the result is a mess. Otherwise, there is pure harmony, an easy give and take, and the painting comes out well." Without there being any content to grasp, and the artist being unaware of what he was doing, it was impossible to assess these works. All one could say was that one liked them in some sort of general, entirely subjective way. Critics and art historians bent themselves double trying to find some words to write as a commentary to abstract expressionist artworks. The value of such pieces was only given by the dealers and the galleries. With Verist surrealism, and with much of biomorphic surrealism, there was always some underlying narrative, allegory, or emblematizing of pictorial ideas, so that a knowledgeable viewer could give some meaningful critique and appraisal beyond a purely subjective, "I like this." But this was impossible with contentless, abstract expressionist works. They eluded any commentary. Most critics were reduced to merely describing the paint surface, as that was all that there was. Here is such an example of an art historian struggling to describe number 1, Lavender Mist, one of Pollock's drip paintings. This painting attests to the artist's pure virtuosity of paint handling. One can trace his rhythmic movements in the long arcs, staccato dribbles, or coagulated pools of colour that accrue into a rich shimmering interlace. With only a few hues, he achieved a soft tonal effect, not by the actual use of lavender, but with aluminium and salmon-coloured paint. The weave of long black and white strokes implies an inherent linear structure, but the all-over composition exhibits an even density throughout, with no discernible focal point. Pollock, who spoke of being in his paintings, left very literal traces of his presence in the multiple handprints at the upper edges of the canvas. Thus all it seems one can say about the work concerns its surface texture and the way Jackson Pollock threw paint at the canvas, together with the fact that he left his handprints in the wet paint. Indeed, this inability to give any meaningful commentary appears to be part of the style. The art historian William C. Seitz wrote, "Abstract expressionists value expression over perfection, vitality over finish, fluctuation over repose, the unknown over the known, the veiled over the clear, the individual over society, and the inner over the outer." Abstract expressionism represented a dead end, where art ran into a barrier of total abstraction and found only the emptiness of no content. Happily, Dalí, Carrington, Varro, and most of the other surrealists paid no attention to this and continued in their style, creating some amazing paintings. Indeed, we will see that after the 1950s, there arose new developments in surrealism, with the appearance of fantastic realism, visionary art, magical realism, and other movements which were the scions sprouting from the earlier surrealist route. These continued to paint works with content. We'll look at all these developments in future lessons in this series. In the next lesson, we'll take a look at some early surrealist painters whom we have not yet been able to include in our survey.